year and a half working as a cleaner and safety expert for BHP and thoroughly enjoying the life out there, and has subsequently kept in touch with the community. He's more recently studied at the University of Tasmania, and then after that Magdalen College of Cambridge, where he has MPhil and PhD from, and has written at least one book on tough cases and difficult choices. I think I've got the title slightly wrong there, and is working on another looking at the whole question of ethics and consciousness and conscience. And this evening he's going to intrigue us, I think, with some no doubt tales, but also some detailed analysis of a topic that we discussed a week or two ago on the IPA committee meeting after Simon had kindly suggested. It's the idea of uses and abuses. Was it others using and abusing, or people within, or the system itself being used and abused? And he says on the way here this evening that in fact he's going to adopt a well-rounded approach and explore all possible avenues of the ways in which systems used, abused and otherwise. So it gives, as I say, great pleasure to welcome Dr. Simon Longstaff. Simon will happily talk for less than the 4 hours that I indicated earlier, probably for 40-45 minutes, and I understand happy to take questions from the floor. So great pleasure, Simon.
Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'd like to pay my own personal respects to the Larrakia people on whose country we meet, their elders, past, present and future. I'd also just like to introduce myself, as I've been taught to do, from the people who I've maintained kinship ties with on Groote Island over all the years since I was there, as you heard, as a 17-year-old. Naiawa nanyongwa kira neondangama, naiawa nanyongwa kira yalonga uno kwama, jabani lalara, angna luba ayangatara bilankwa, Groote Island. So it's just a greeting and introduction. Most places where I would say that, and I don't say that too often, you might imagine, it would be meaningless to the people who heard it, but up here, being able to introduce myself in Anantliakwa is a great privilege. I flew up today, and I'll fly down to Sydney tomorrow for a meeting which I have to attend reasonably early in the morning, which means catching the red eye from Darwin. And you might wonder, why would somebody voluntarily fly up over 4.5 hours or whatever it was and make such a quick turnaround? And the reason for doing so is that I truly think it a privilege to be able to address you, given the important work that all of you are engaged in your different ways. I want to talk more about that as I speak later on, getting into the greater depth into the topic. But also because of my affection for the territory, I rarely pass up an opportunity to come here. Those of you who've lived all of your lives, or most of your lives, of course, have the experience of being here deeply ingrained. I was here for a much shorter period, but I don't know whether it was just the impressionable nature of my youth or, and I think it is the latter, more to do with the power of place and the events that I was involved in, but it's never left me. And I won't turn down, as I say, unless I absolutely have to, opportunities to come back up here and sort of touch that part of my own history. I did start there. I was 17 and a couple of days old when I came up. I'd been told, I'd finished school, I was still 16, and was told by my father, a bit of a surprise to me actually, that he'd given me my secondary education and that was it. There was nothing else from the family coffers for me. So if I wanted to do anything else in life, I'd have to pay for it myself. And I didn't really know what I would do to be able to afford some of the things I might hope to do, like going to university. So I headed off to Chifley Square, as it's now called, in Sydney, and obtained my prospectors and miners certificate, and got a job as had a pretty grand title back in those days. I was known as a service attendant when I first started, but soon discovered that exactly what that meant. It was cleaning toilets, emptying bins. I mean, you'd all know what it's like during the wet season when you approach a bin which has got a a bit of old milkshake and prawn residue sort of sitting there. So it sort of awakens the senses. Used to go up and clean out the dongas on 4X Hill. For any of you who've been up to Groot would know that. It was a legendary contractors camp. And it was quite a big shift, you might imagine, to go from being a cleaner. And then later I did a whole lot of training and things and became a safety officer and had like a boys' own annual adventure driving ambulances and did my licence test in a split-axle fire truck. Got a commendation for putting out the rubbish truck when it caught fire after backing down into a fire in D quarry. So I had all these wonderful experiences. And then, somewhat bizarrely in some people's minds, find myself in Cambridge of all places, where they say, well, how can you start like that and end up in Cambridge doing philosophy? But I did, and it's probably some of the most important things I did were here, because it convinced me that the work of a philosopher is not something which should be restricted just to the Ivy League universities of the world like Cambridge. Extraordinary place it is. I'd been talking about philosophy with the guys on Sea Shift, the rough as guts as they were, and I was convinced that philosophical discourse, or I wouldn't put it in those terms, isn't something restricted for any particular group, that it is for everybody. And it's important to be able to unpick ideas hopefully in ordinary language. And I'll talk a little bit about one of the most extraordinary experiences I had in terms of the lesson it taught me with a taxi driver. So that's just a bit of potted personal history, which may have some resonance here that, as I say, it wouldn't in other places, just the impact it's had on me and the kind of directions it's taken me in from the times when I was on group. Well, what I want to talk about this evening is the topic I've given is the uses and abuses of the public service. And when I talk about that, I'm not thinking about the territory. I'm not thinking about any particular government. I'm thinking more about the structural relationships that arise in a democracy and some of the challenges that we need to face around this. I noticed that in earlier orations given honouring the name of David Hawkes and the work he did here over many years, that ethics has been a theme. And even Linnell Briggs, I think, last year was talking about it. And she was focusing more on technical issues. I'm not going to be speaking so much about technical questions of codes and things like that. I want to take a much broader picture and set the whole question of the public service and its role and ethics in perhaps a slightly different way in which it is sometimes talked about in gatherings of this kind. And frame it particularly in terms of issues of leadership and a certain model of leadership. Now, by that I don't mean the thing that sometimes is meant by leadership, that is the things that people with titles, officers or roles, members of the SES or equivalent, do. I'm talking about the kind of leadership that anybody can exercise, whatever their title or role, and the kind of leadership that the public service as an institution might also provide. But to frame that idea about leadership, its ethical component and how it can be used and abused, I want to take a much broader and perhaps deeper historical context and begin our discussion by referring to you a book that I think every leader should read, every person should read really, written by the American historian Barbara Tuchman. Now, she died a few years ago, and some of you may have read one or more of her works, but the particular book that I think is such an important thing to read has the title The March of Folly. The March of Folly by Barbara Tuchman. In The March of Folly, Barbara Tuchman wants to understand what lays at the heart of a series of acts of folly of monumental proportion. And she chooses to examine, amongst other things, these core cases. She wants to know, why was it that the Trojans lifted the lintel from their gate and admitted the Greek horse, which led to their destruction? How was it that the Catholic Church, which then had hegemony in Western Europe, sponsored the outrage that flowed from Martin Luther, which then caused the Reformation, which saw the end of that hegemony? What was it about the decisions of the British